let's begin with a brief introduction to realism in international relations. Realism is considered one of the oldest and most influential theories in the field. It focuses on how states compete for power and security in a world without a central authority. The roots of realism go back to ancient times. One of the earliest examples is Thucydides, who wrote about the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. He explained how fear, power, and self-interest lead to conflict, ideas that are still central to realism today. Later, Thomas Hobbes described human nature as selfish and fearful, living in a state of nature without law or order. His ideas helped shape how realists view international politics as a place of constant tension and insecurity. Realism became especially dominant after World War II, where scholars like Hans Morgenthau argue that international politics is mainly about the struggle for power. In the next slide, we will look at the actual definition of realism in international relations. Now that we have introduced realism, let's look at its definition more closely. Realism is a theory in international relations that sees the global system as naturally competitive and full of conflict. According to this theory, states are the main players on the world stage, and their actions are mainly driven by the desire to survive and protect their own interests. Because there is no central authority above states, what we call an anarchic system, each state must rely on itself. That's why we often hear the term self-help used in realism. In this view, power and security are the most important goals. Moral values or international laws come second if they conflict with national interests. So, in short, realism sees the world as a place where conflict is natural, peace is temporary, and power is the key to survival. In this slide, we will explore the two main branches of realism, classical realism and neo-realism, also known as structural realism. First, classical realism focuses on human nature. Thinkers like Thucydides, Hobbes, and especially Hans Morgenthau believe that humans are naturally selfish, insecure, and driven by a desire for power. Because states are led by people, they behave the same way, constantly seeking power to survive in a competitive world. Next, we have neo-realism developed by Kenneth Waltz. This version shifts the focus from human nature to the structure of the international system. Specifically, the fact that the world is anarchic with no central authority. In this environment, states act out of necessity to survive and maintain power. Neo-realism is further divided into two types. Defensive realism, which says states aim to protect themselves and avoid unnecessary conflict. Offensive realism, which argues that the states seek to gain as much power as possible to dominate others. These branches help explain different state behaviors in global politics, from cautious diplomacy to aggressive expansion.
Hi, my name is SYUHADA binti Bonandar, and I will introduce the founder father. The first one is Thucydides. Thucydides is an ancient Greek historian. He is known as the founder of classical realism in the international relation. Through his famous work, The History of Peloponnesian War, he examined the conflict between Athens and Sparta. This showing that wars are often caused by the desire for power as well as struggles over justice and morality. Classical realism is based on the idea that human nature is egoistic and self-interested. It means that states act in their own interest, especially to protect their security and survival. Because of this, they often compete for power, which can lead to conflict and war. Thucydides' insights have remained influential, shaping both classical and modern thinkers in their understanding of global politics. Second is Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli has written a book that called The Prince in the 16th century. In this book, it presents the key ideas about power and leadership that form a basis of political realism. One of his famous arguments is that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved. If he cannot be both, Machiavelli believed that a good ruler must be willing to do evil when necessary, and that adaptability to changing circumstances is essential for maintaining power and achieving success. He argued that immoral behavior is normal and even effective in politics, as rulers often need to make tough decisions that may not appear ethical but serve the greater purpose of stability and control. Machiavelli thinking was a blend of classical ideas and Christian thought, focusing more on practical outcome than moral intention. According to him, the judgment of a ruler should be based on result, not the morality of the action. In other words, if the outcome benefits the state, the means can be justice. The third father is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes introduced realist idea through his famous book *RABIATUL*. In this book, he explained how people behave in the real world, especially when there is no strong government. He also said that there are three main reasons why people fight. The first one is competition for things they want, diffidence, fear of others, and the desire for glory and reputation. Hobbes believed that people are naturally selfish and afraid, which makes life without rules is unsafe and full of conflict. He also believed in the strength of power to maintain peace and order, arguing that concepts like right or wrong, or justice and injustice can only exist under a common power that enforces laws. Without such authorities, there would be chaos and moral standard would be no meaning. The fourth father is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a famous thinker from Geneva, born in 1712 and died in 1778. He shared important ideas that helped shape the theory of classical realism. Rousseau believed that in their natural state, before rules and government, people are selfish and mainly care about themselves. Even if they want peace, they often feel afraid that the other will attack. So they will get ready for a war. This fear and mistrust lead to conflict, which he called that state of war. Russia's ideas are important because they help explain why countries go to the war. He believed that even when peace is possible, fear and self-interest make people fight. The last father is Kenneth Walsh. Kenneth Walsh was an American scholar born in 1924 and died in 2013. He is known as the founder of neorealism and also called by structural realism. Unlike Rousseau, Walsh said that the wars do not happen because of human nature, but because of how the international system works. In global politics, there is no world government, which creates anarchy. This means every country must protect itself and compete for power to stay safe. Walsh's ideas are important because he showed that the structure of the world system, not just human behavior, is what often causes conflict and war.
Assalamualaikum, I am NURIN binti Muhammad SAFRI. Now I'll be presenting about the main point of the theories. For the first main point of the theories is anarchy in the international system. For realism, it holds that the international system is anarchic, where there is no overarching authority to enforce laws or prevent conflict. This forces states to act independently to protect themselves. Kenneth Walsh also argues that the absence of central authority creates a system of self-help where structure compels state to prioritize security and survival. For example, this can be seen during the Russian-Ukraine war, where there is no global authority that can completely stop the war. State has to act based on their own power and interests. The second main point of the theories is state-centrism. Realists has considered that the state as the most important actor in international politics. States are seen as sovereign, irrational entities that act in a pursuit of their national interests. Hans Morgenthau also emphasized that international politics, like all politics, is a struggle for power, and states are the primary agents in that struggle. For example, in global negotiations, decisions are usually made by the states, such as United States or China, rather than international organizations or NGOs. The last main point of the theories is national interest. For this factor, states act primarily in pursuit of their national interests, usually defined in terms of a power as security. Morality and ideology are secondary. Morgenthau states that the main signpost that helps political realism to find its way through the landscape of international politics in the concept of interest defined in terms of power. This can be seen where a country may support a dictatorship of its benefits their national security or economic goals, even if it's morally questionable.
Hi, my name is NURIN. I will explain furthermore about the theory. Based on realism theory, there is several arguments from the realist theories, which is true balance of power. So the main idea in realism is the balance of power, which means peace and stability are more likely when no single country is much stronger than the others. To avoid being dominated, countries form alliances or build up their military strength. So for the explanation, realists believe that if one country becomes too powerful, it can threaten the independence of the other country. So other countries respond by teaming up or strengthening their own force to keep the powerful country in check. So this idea helps to explain why countries might join military alliance, race to build more weapons, or even try to get nuclear weapons. This is all because they want to keep the power between countries more equal and stable. For example, during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, they tried to stop each other from becoming too powerful. So this already led to a nuclear arms race and the creation of military alliance like NATO and the Warsaw Pact. So the second argument is through competition and conflict. So the main argument is realism says that the world has no central authority, so every country must protect itself. So this often causes competition and conflict, especially between powerful countries, as each one of them try to stay secure and strong. For the further explanation, in a realist world, countries fear that the others might become a threat. Since there is no global police, they rely on their own military and strategies to survive. Even peaceful actions can look threatening, leading to a security dilemma where one's country defense make the others feel unsafe and respond with more defense. This fear and mistrust lead to rival, arms race, and sometimes war, not because of the leaders won war, but because the system pushes countries to focus on survival and power over trust and cooperation. For example, the conflict between the Russia and NATO. So the Russia and NATO conflict show that this realist thinking is in action, which is Russia sees NATO as growing closer to its border by adding countries like Poland and the Baltics as a threat. To protect itself, Russia built up its military and invaded Ukraine in 2014 and again in 2022. NATO responded by strengthening its force, helping Ukraine, and adding new members like Finland and Sweden in 2024. This country says that they are defending themselves, but each of them sees the other as a threat. This is a security dilemma where the action meant for defense lead to more tension. Realist says that this conflict is not about personal belief or leaders. It's about power, security, and survival in a world without a higher authority. However, realism is often criticized for being overly cynical or pessimistic in their ideology, which is they fail to explain cooperation. Realism has been criticized because it doesn't clearly explain why countries sometimes help each other, even when it doesn't give them more power or direct benefits. Realism focuses on self-interest, survival, and gaining power in a world with no global authority. But this view ignores cases where countries act kindly or cooperatively, even at a cost to themselves. So one example is the Marshall Plan after World War II. So the United States gave large amount of money to help rebuild the Europe. Realists might say that US did this to gain influence and stop enemies from rising again. But critics argue that this view is too simple. They said that the US also wanted to support peace and help the others, showing moral and humanitarian reasons that realism doesn't usually consider. So, this kind of actions challenge the realism main idea. So when the US tried to make the world a better place, it showed the idealistic behavior, which is something realism often ignores. Realism mostly sees the world as a place of power struggles, fear, and competition, not cooperation. Because of this, critics say that realism gives a limited and too negative view of global politics. It struggles to explain action based on kindness, ethics, or long-term teamwork between the countries. So the second criticism of realism is overemphasis on power and conflict. So the main idea is realism is often seen as too negative because it focuses too much on power struggles and conflict. It often ignores the importance of cooperation, ethics, and international organization. So for the explanation, the first one is anarchic worldview. Realism sees the world as a place without a global authority, where countries must focus on survival and self-interest. This makes teamwork between the countries less likely in realist thinking. So the second one is ignore cooperation. Realism often overlooks the role of international cooperation through groups like the United Nations, global trade deals, and international law. The third one is no focus on ethics. Realism mostly cares about power and national interests, not moral values or doing what's right for the others. So the last one is self-fulfilling prophecy. By expecting conflict, realism may actually cause it. If countries believe that the others cannot be trusted, they may act in ways that increase tension and lead to conflict. For example, realism expects big powers like the US and China to compete for power. But liberal theories say that economic ties and international organizations can help these countries work together and avoid conflict. In short, critics say that realism gives a limited view by focusing too much on conflict and ignoring how cooperation and ethics also shape international relations.
Assalamualaikum. My name is HAIFAA SOFEA binti SAAIN. I will be talking about impact of realism in international relations. First of all is emphasis on state power and national interest. This idea falls under the political aspect of international relations because it focuses on how countries make decisions based on their political goals. In realism, countries prioritize their own power and national interests above everything else. This means that countries often make decisions to protect their own interests, even if those choices harm other countries or break international rules. Realism also believes that states must be strong, especially in military power, because they cannot trust others to protect them. Instead of relying on cooperation, countries prefer to rely on their own power and resources. As a result, international laws or human rights are often overlooked if they conflict with what a country sees as necessary for its own security and power. A clear example of this is the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. The US believed Iraq posed a threat to its national security and acted in its own national interest, despite strong opposition from other countries. This illustrates how countries sometimes act in ways that focus on their own survival and power, even if it means going against global opinion. Second is protectionism and economic nationalism. This impact falls under the economic dimension because it relates to how countries manage trade industries and their overall economy. Protectionism means using policies like tariffs, such tax on imports, and quotas, such limits on how much can be imported, to protect local business from foreign competition. This helps domestic companies to grow, but can also make imported goods more expensive. On the other hand, economic nationalism focuses on the country's own resources and interests. It often includes limiting foreign investment and encouraging people to support local industries. Both of these approaches can reduce international trade, create trade tension, and increase the risk of trade wars. Countries using these strategies believe that self-sufficiency and economic control are more important than global cooperation. For example, the US and China trade war between 2018 and 2019. The US government placed high tariff on Chinese goods to protect American industries like steel and technology.
This made Chinese products more expensive in the US, which encouraged people to buy American products instead. Even though this created tension with China, the US did it to protect its national economic interests, showing how protectionism and economic nationalism work in real life. Last but not least, emphasis on power and security. This is a major military and security impact in international relations. Realism sees the world as dangerous and full of competition. There is no world government to keep countries safe, so each country must protect itself. To do that, they focus on building power and military strength to feel secure and survive. In realism, countries believe that the best way to stay safe is by becoming powerful, especially through military force. They do not trust each country, so they rely on their own strength. Because of this, security becomes the top priority. But when one country builds up its military, other countries will threaten and do the same. This creates a security dilemma where everyone feels unsafe, even though no one may want war. It often leads to armed races, with countries competing to have more weapons and better defense systems. A strong example is the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both countries built huge nuclear weapons programs to protect themselves. Even though they never fought directly, they kept increasing their military power because they feared each other. This is a clear example of realism focused on power and security in action.
To conclude, realism presents a very practical and sometimes harsh view of international politics. It teaches us that the global system operates without a central authority, and because of this, states are forced to rely on themselves. They focus on protecting their national interests, and power becomes the most important tool for ensuring their survival. Whether through classical realism, which blames human nature, or neo-realism, which points to the structure of the international system, both agree that conflict is unavoidable and peace is fragile. Even though realism is often criticized for being too pessimistic or ignoring international cooperation, it remains one of the most powerful and widely used theories in understanding how states behave on the world stage. Realism reminds us that while diplomacy and peace efforts are important, they often exist alongside the constant pursuit of power and security.
Hello and hi, my name is NURIN from Group 2. So today I would like to ask a question, which is, what drives states to make decisions that seem selfish or aggressive in international affairs?
Thank you, Azira, for the question. To answer that question, from a realist perspective, states are rational actors that seek to maximize their power and protect their national interests. In an international system, without a central authority to enforce the rules, states must assume that other states will also act in their own interests. This uncertainty creates fear and mistrust, which often leads to act aggressively or selfishly, not out of cruelty, but out of desire for survival. A decision that might appear selfish, such as refusing to help another state in crisis or invading a neighboring country, might be viewed by the acting state as a necessary step to secure strategic advantages, protect borders, or prevent future threats. Realism holds that the morality plays a limited role in international politics. Instead of calculation of power, security, and influence drive most foreign policy decisions.
My name is Nur Farahani binti Muhammad Nazri, and I am from Group 3. So my questions to Group 1 is, why does realism important to international relations?
Thank you, Hani, for the question. Realism is important in international relations because it helps us understand how countries act to protect their own interests and power in a world without a global government. It explains why conflict often happen and why cooperation can be difficult. As example, the Cold War shows the importance of realism because it clearly illustrates how countries act based on the power and self-interested, not moral value. The US and USSR competed for global influence, built military alliances, and avoided direct war to protect their national security. Matches view that in international relations, states prioritize power, survival, and security in a world without a higher authority to keep peace. It proves that realism helps explain real-world behavior between powerful countries.
Assalamualaikum. My name is ATHIRAH. I am from Group 3. So my question is, can a theory that ignores humanitarian and moral action still be considered relevant in today's international system? Why or why not?
Thank you, Fatiha, for the question. Yes, a theory like realism, which ignores moral and humanitarian actions, can still be useful today, but only in some cases. Realism helps us to understand power struggles, war, and why countries act in their own interests. It is useful when looking at conflicts or competition between strong countries like the US and China, or Russia and NATO. But realism has limits. It doesn't explain why countries help each other, give aid, or work together on big problems like climate change or human rights. These actions are often based on values, law, and shared goals. So, realism is still important. It cannot explain everything. To fully understand today's world, we also need other theories like liberalism, which looks at cooperation, and constructivism, which focuses on ideas and values.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Muhammad Loman Hakim bin Muhammad Fuzi. I'm from Group 5. I will ask the question. In a world facing global challenges like climate change, is realism still relevant?
Thank you for the question. Yes, realism is still relevant, but it has its limits, especially when it comes to global challenges like climate change. Realism helps us understand why countries often struggle to cooperate. States focus on their own national interests like economic growth or energy security, even if that means delaying action on climate issues. There is no global government to enforce climate commitments, which fits with realism's idea of an anarchic international system. However, realism doesn't fully explain the growing role of international organizations, climate agreements, or the global push for cooperation. For these parts, other theories like liberalism and constructivism offer better insights. So, while realism explains the obstacles, we need other perspectives to understand how real global progress can be made.
Assalamualaikum. I am Nurul Amira binti Asrosdi and I am from Group 6. My question is, why do realists think power is more important than cooperation? Thank you.
For the question. So, the realists think power is more important than cooperation because realism sees the world as dangerous and full of conflict. Realists believe countries cannot fully trust each other, so they need to focus on their own strength and survival first, not rely on others.